Hey there, come a little closer to the fire and let the room grow smaller around us. Just you, me, and the slow breathing of the night. Tonight I want to offer you a darker truth, one that hides in plain sight, not in monsters, not in curses, but in the quiet shape of land, and in the way a single road can become 1,000 roads, or a wall. We are going to rewind time, far beyond any photograph, back to a moment so fragile that the whole world could have tipped another way, and we will watch how tiny advantages gather like dust, how they thicken, how they settle, and how they can look like destiny. You will hear about a continent that runs like a long hallway from east to west, where seeds and animals travel easily, and another that stretches from north to south, where the same seed meets heat, rain, forest, sand, and fails again and again. You will hear about striped horses that will never truly consent to a saddle, and the gentler herd animals that did, and how that difference became a lever under the weight of history. You will hear about invisible passengers, small as breath, riding with ships, and arriving before any soldier, turning whole towns quiet and leaving empty cradles. If you like these slow walks through the hidden past, tap like, subscribe, and settle in with us for the long night. Now let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let your tongue rest. And feel the warmth on your face, as if the firelight is smoothing every sharp edge inside you. Take a slow breath in, and an even slower breath out, and allow the space behind your eyes to dim, like a lantern being turned down. In your mind, step back, not quickly, not with a snap, but as if you are walking through a museum at closing time, when the last footsteps fade and the glass cases become little mirrors. Imagine the year is not a year with names, not a year with kings, but a time more than 70,000 years before the present, when modern humans already have the same kind of mind you carry now. Same brain size, same capacity for language, same ability to plan, to remember, to wonder, to fear, to love, to invent. If you were standing here with me, you would feel the air of East Africa on your skin, warm even at night, carrying the scent of dust and dry grass and distant water. You would hear insects and the occasional soft call of a bird that does not sleep all at once. You would see a small group of people by a fire, not as mythic figures, just tired travelers with children leaning against knees, hands resting on stone tools, eyes scanning the dark. They are our direct ancestors, and their faces are closer to yours than you might expect. Now, here is the experiment that makes the mind go quiet with awe. In your imagination, we split them, not by worth, not by intelligence, not by courage, only by direction. One group stays within Africa, moving with the seasons, learning every bend of river, every taste of root, every sign in the sky. Another group steps into the Arabian Peninsula. Another will drift along coasts and valleys and cold edges until, much later, their descendants are in Europe, in Asia, in islands, in continents that do not even have names yet. Now let time flow, as calmly as water in a wide river. Let it run forward for thousands of years. then tens of thousands, then a long, smooth slide into the year 1500 of the Common Era. Look around this imagined world. In parts of Europe, you find steel, ships that cross oceans, printed words, cannons, and cities that feel like stone machines. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, in the Americas, in Australia, you find many societies still using stone tools, or living without writing, or without large domesticated animals, or without the kind of dense cities that fill maps. It can look, at first glance, like a story about brains. It is not. This topic makes people nervous, and for good reason, because for centuries, these differences were used as weapons, as excuse, as a mask worn over cruelty. People built racist stories and called them science, and used them to justify slavery, colonialism, genocide, and the slow, grinding theft of human lives. Those stories were lies, comfortable lies for the powerful, and sharp knives for everyone else. But refusing to look at the question does not heal it. A conquistador with steel and disease did have an advantage over an Incan warrior with obsidian, no matter the courage in that warrior's chest. The question is not who was better. The question is what was different about where they lived. And here, in the firelight, I want to be careful, honest, and calm, because the real answer is colder than pride and stranger than any myth. It has almost nothing to do with the people themselves. It has everything to do with geography, the shape of continents, the plants that happen to grow there, the animals that happen to tolerate us, the germs that happen to evolve alongside herds, and the way small accidents compound for thousands of years. I have always found it strange how easily we blame people for outcomes that were set in motion long before any of them were born. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and sense a mood that was there before you arrived. History can feel like that. A room full of old air. Tonight, we open a window. First, we remember something simple and profound. Every person alive, whether your ancestors lived in forests or deserts, coastlines or mountains, had ancestors in Africa. All of them. Africa is not just one place on a map. It is the long beginning, and it held humanity for hundreds of thousands of years. A vast workshop of adaptation, the earliest complex stone tools, the first pigments, the first long trade routes, the first deep experiments in how to be human. Africa is also where human diversity is richest. Not because Africans are a different kind of human, but because everyone else is a smaller sample of what was already there. When a small group leaves, it carries only what fits in its hands. When it keeps moving, each step can shrink the bundle again. That shrinking is quiet. It happens in bloodlines, in chance meetings, in births and losses, in the soft arithmetic of who survives. So in part one, we begin where the story begins, with that small fire in East Africa, and with the first gentle split of a human river into different streams. In the next part, we will walk closer to the bottleneck, to the shrinking numbers, and then, with a steady hand, we will lay a map on the table and trace a finger along the lines that changed everything, slowly, patiently, as if the world itself is breathing. Stay with that fire a little longer, Listen to the way it settles, the small pop of resin in wood, the faint hiss where a sap pocket gives up. In the distance, there is a night wind, and it moves over grass like a hand brushing fabric. If you were there, you might feel grit on your lips, and you would taste how dry seasons leave their mark on everything. These people do not know they are on the edge of a story that will be retold in libraries and in classrooms. They only know the needs of the next day. Water, shade, food, safety, a place to lay the children down where insects are fewer. And yet, without knowing it, they carry the full kit of humanity. Hands that can shape stone into a blade, thin enough to slice hide. Minds that can picture tomorrow and bring tomorrow closer by planning. Voices that can trade information and comfort and warning and joke and lullaby. You can imagine one elder leaning forward, rubbing ash between fingers, watching sparks float up. A child stares at the sparks as if they are tiny stars. Someone hums, low and steady, not for performance, but for calm. In those soft sounds, you can hear the beginning of what we are doing right now. A voice at night, telling a story so the darkness feels less sharp. Now, when we say the group splits, it is easy to imagine it as a clean cut, like a knife through cloth. In reality, it would have been slow, messy, made of arguments, hunger, curiosity, and fear. Some would want to stay with familiar rivers. Some would want to follow game into new valleys. Some would have lost family and could not bear to remain where memories sat like stones. And some, honestly, would have simply been the kind of person who cannot stop walking when there is a horizon. You know that feeling, when the world feels too small and the mind keeps leaning forward. So they go. A few steps at first, then a day's walk, then another. They cross stretches of land where the sun is a white weight in the sky, and the ground gives back heat at night, like a warm stone. They learn new plants, new tastes, new dangers. They learn the patience of waiting, and the quiet skill of watching tracks, and the art of moving without wasting water. The group that stays does not stand still either. Africa itself changes. Rain belts shift. Wet times open corridors of grass and lake. Dry times close them. A village is born, then fades. A tool style appears, spreads, then disappears like a fashion made of flint. This is one reason Africa holds so much variation. So many experiments ran there for so long. It is like a vast library where many books were written at once, in many hands, in many voices, and only some were carried outward. Now think again about that small band that leaves maybe a few hundred, maybe less. A thin stream leaving a wide river. This is the bottleneck, the shrinking number, the narrow doorway. It matters because the doorway does not choose the best. It chooses whoever happens to pass through. A child with a cough might survive by chance. A strong hunter might die from a fall. A woman with good knowledge of plants might be lost to infection, while another, less skilled, lives. And so the bundle of genes that goes outward is not a prize. It is a sample. It is luck. Then, as the migrants spread, each new place is founded by another small group. A few families move on. They carry only part of what they had. This is called a serial founder effect, but you do not need the term to feel its meaning. Imagine pouring water from one cup to another, and then another, and then another. A little spills each time. The water that remains is still water, but it is less of the original lake. Meanwhile, Africa keeps its lake. This is why, even now, genetic diversity inside Africa can be greater than across huge regions elsewhere. Not because anyone is better, because the story began there and continued there, without the same narrow doorway. If you let that sink in, something in the mind loosens. The idea of separate kinds of humans starts to dissolve. What remains is one long family, with different branches, shaped by different winds. And the dark part of the story is not difference itself. The dark part is what humans later did with those differences. How they turned small variations into ladders and pushed people down them. How they dressed greed in the costume of nature. But for now, here, by the fire, we keep our attention on the older truth. The ground, the climate, the animals, the plants, the germs, the invisible arithmetic of advantage. In a moment, we will set down a map like an old parchment on a wooden table. We will smooth it with a palm. We will trace the long horizontal stretch of Eurasia and the tall vertical stretch of Africa. We will speak softly about wheat and yams, about horses and zebras, about rivers that carry boats, and rivers that break into rapids and refuse. We will speak about how a continent can become a highway or a maze. But before we do, rest here for a few breaths more, with the ember glow and the knowledge that the same species, the same mind, was always there, in every direction, and that the tragedy to come was never written in blood. It was written in the shape of land, and in the hands that learn to turn that shape into power. As you breathe, notice how the fire makes its own weather. Warmth rises. Cool air slides in low. A slow circulation you can almost see in the wavering candlelight. That is how history works too. Warm currents and cold currents. Pressures you do not notice until you are inside them. For the people around that ancient African fire, the pressure is simple. Live through the season. Keep the children fed. Stay close enough to water. Avoid the teeth in the dark. For their descendants, the pressures will be stranger. Borders, taxes, ships, sickness, books, steel. But the roots are here, a small circle of light, surrounded by night. When you are ready, we will step from this circle to the wide world and begin to measure continents the way fate measured them. Not quickly, just a gentle step, a quiet footfall on packed earth, a breath that smells of smoke and dry leaves, and then another step, and another, until the map appears in the mind like a shadow on a wall. We will follow that shadow in the next part, and let it explain itself. The map in my mind is old, not because paper ages, but because the questions do. I lay it down on the table beside the fire, and the candlelight makes the lines tremble slightly, as if coastlines are breathing. If you were sitting here with me, You would hear the soft rasp of parchment, and you would smell wax, wood smoke, and a faint mineral scent, like stone warmed by hands. Now we begin with the simplest claim in this whole story. Geography is destiny, not because land has a will, but because land sets the rules of what can spread, what can survive, what can be shared, and how quickly small inventions become common tools. And once you see those rules, so many mysteries stop being mysterious and start being tragic in a quiet, almost mechanical way. Picture Eurasia, a vast stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It runs mostly from west to east, a long band of similar latitudes. When a plant adapts to one part of that band, it often tolerates many other parts, because the seasons speak the same language there. Winter, spring, summer, autumn, a rhythm of cold and warmth that repeats in recognizable patterns. Now picture Africa. It runs from north to south, Mediterranean edges, then desert, then semi-arid transition, then tropical savanna, then rainforest, then savanna again, then temperate edges. The seasons change their voice as you move. Rain becomes the main clock, not temperature. Heat becomes constant. Diseases shift. Soils shift. Insects shift. A crop that loves one zone may fail completely in the next. This is not a moral story. It is a physical one. Now, I want you to feel this, not as a lecture, but as a scene. Imagine a farmer discovers a grain that grows well. In one place, it is wheat or barley, grasses with big seeds, plants that almost seem ready for human hands. They grow quickly. They offer dense calories. They can be dried and stored. They can wait in a jar for winter and still be food. That storage matters more than it sounds. It is the difference between a season and a surplus, between feeding only a family and feeding a specialist. And a specialist is a strange creature, a person who does not spend every daylight hour finding food, a person who can spend days shaping clay, or learning the moods of metal, or counting, or drawing marks that become writing. A surplus becomes time. Time becomes invention. Invention becomes more surplus. And then the cycle feeds itself, like a small flame that finds dry grass. In the Fertile Crescent, those founder crops were like dry grass waiting. Wheat, barley, lentils, peas, chickpeas. They asked to be planted. They asked to be gathered. And when people began to plant them, they got something that could sit still. Villages could become towns. Towns could become cities. Cities could build walls, temples, records. The storehouse becomes a new kind of heart. Now travels south into much of tropical Africa. You still find brilliant crops: sorghum, millet, yams, African rice, teff, coffee. These are not weaker plants. In their homes, they are often stronger. They endure drought that would kill wheat. They hold up under heat. They feed millions even now. But many are harder to harvest in the wild. Seeds shatter. Plants grow irregularly. tubers rot sooner. Humidity invites mold. Insects arrive quickly. Storage becomes a constant battle, so surplus is harder to accumulate. Not impossible, just harder. And when surplus is smaller, the number of specialists grows more slowly. The fire of compounding invention still burns, but it burns in different shapes, in different places, sometimes in bursts, sometimes in careful, slow embers. Now add another layer: animals. Only a small number of large mammals were ever truly domesticated across all human history. It is a narrow gate, like that migration bottleneck, and it is not fair. A domesticable animal needs traits that feel almost like temperament, but they are biology. It must tolerate people. It must breed in captivity. It must grow fast enough to be worth waiting for. It must have a social structure that can be bent, a hierarchy that humans can step into. Horses had this. Cattle had this. Sheep and goats had this. Pigs had this. Chickens had this. Camels had this. They were not gifts from the gods. They were accidents of evolution, standing there, ready enough. Now look at Africa. Africa had magnificent animals. So many. But magnificence is not the same as domesticable. Zebras look like they are offering themselves, striped cousins of horses, standing in the sun, and yet they do not yield. They bite. They panic. They refuse the leash in their bones. Some people in many centuries tried again and again. Egyptians, Romans, modern colonists. The pattern repeats. A few individual zebras can be trained for a time, but the species does not become a partner the way the horse did. Elephants can be tamed, but breeding them in captivity is rare, slow, difficult, and so they do not become the same kind of widespread engine. And many African large mammals evolved alongside humans for a long time. They learned us. They learned that humans are danger. So selection favored animals that flee, or fight, or refuse. In Eurasia, many large mammals had less time with humans. They were more naive to this bipedal predator. And naivety, in this context, becomes domesticability. Now, feel the consequence. A plow pulled by oxen can turn more soil than human arms. A cart pulled by horses can carry more than a person on foot. A rider on horseback can cross distance faster than any runner. A society with draft animals can feed more people with fewer farmers. Again, surplus. Again, specialists. Again, compounding. And in warfare, a horse becomes a new kind of height. It turns the body into a moving platform. It changes tactics. It changes borders. Now, place another invisible thing on the map: disease. When humans live close to domesticated animals, they share more than warmth. They share germs. Pathogens jump species. Cattle give rise to illnesses that become human diseases. Pigs and birds offer their own viruses. In dense farming towns, these diseases can circulate. They can become the grim background music of childhood. Many die. Some survive. survivors pass on resistance. Over centuries, the population becomes, slowly, a little more hardened. It is a terrible way to earn protection, paid for in graves, but it is paid gradually. Now imagine a ship arrives in a place where those diseases have never circulated. No childhood exposure, no long selection. The pathogens do what they do, indifferent. They spread fast. They take people down before swords even meet. This is one of the darkest mechanisms in history, because it is so impersonal. A kind of conquest without intent, yet it changes everything. Now, return to the map again. Notice rivers. In some places, a river is a highway. A boat can move grain. People, news, ideas travel with the current. In parts of Eurasia, long navigable rivers and connected basins create networks. In Africa, rivers exist, grand rivers, but they often break themselves. Rapids, waterfalls, cataracts, seasonal shifts that turn a path into a wall. The Nile gives life, yet it also has interruptions. The Congo is powerful, but in places it is a stairway of violent water. These details matter. They slow the spread of tools, crops, and words. Not because anyone is silent, because water refuses to carry them smoothly. Then look at coastlines. Europe has many bays and peninsulas, pockets where boats can rest. Africa, relative to its size, has long, smooth stretches that can be harder to approach with small craft. There are exceptions. The Red Sea, the Swahili coast, places of rich maritime trade. Still, the overall shape changes how easily seafaring becomes routine. And routine seafaring becomes trade. And trade becomes a network. And a network becomes a multiplier for invention. All of this sounds so calm when spoken slowly. But it produces outcomes that are not calm. It produces inequality that can look like merit. It produces power that calls itself natural. It produces suffering that is later explained away by myths of superiority. This is why I keep returning to the word luck. Not a bright luck. Not a cheerful luck. A cold luck. Geographic luck. Now let me bring you closer to the human level again, because maps can make us forget bodies. Imagine a mother in a village near the equator, trying to store grain. Heat never fully leaves. Humidity sits on everything like a wet cloth. Insects arrive as if summoned. She dries the harvest. She smokes it. She seals it. Still, loss happens. A child gets fever. Another gets it too. The year becomes a sequence of small emergencies. Now, imagine a mother in a temperate zone, where winter cold slows rot and insects. A storehouse can hold grain longer. A surplus can last through lean months. A specialist can exist. A scribe, a metal worker, a shipbuilder. This is not a story about virtue. It is a story about the background conditions of survival. And those conditions accumulate like layers of sediment. By the time we reach the last 500 years, the layers are thick. Ships built with the help of surplus and competition cross oceans. Guns, built with specialists and metal, reach new shores, and the diseases that were once local tragedies become global disasters. In later parts, we will walk into that collision. The ships, the trade that turns into chains, the borders drawn far away, the wealth that flows in one direction. But for now, as you breathe, hold this gentler understanding. Human beings did not diverge into higher and lower kinds. They walked onto different boards in the same game. Some boards had easier ways for crops and animals and ideas to spread. Some boards had barriers, deserts, forests, rapids, flies, parasites, heat that never breaks. People on every board were fully human. They loved. They invented. They struggled. The difference is that in one place, small inventions could travel like gossip across similar seasons. In another, each step south or north could demand a new invention from scratch. When you picture that, the world becomes less like a ladder and more like a river delta. Many channels, many sediments, many quiet turns. In the next part, we will take one of these channels, the animal channel, and follow it deeper into the strange fact that only a handful of herd animals agreed to live with us, and that agreement rewired everything that came after. For now, let the map fade softly, like ink dissolving in water, and keep only the warmth of the fire, and the steady thought that the true story is not superiority, it is circumstance. There is one more quiet character on this map, so small you could brush it away with a fingertip, yet it holds back whole systems like a gate. A fly, the tsetse fly. In large parts of tropical Africa, it carries parasite that can make horses and cattle too sick to be reliable partners. So even when people know the value of herds, the environment pushes back, and an animal that thrives in one zone may fail in the next. Then there is malaria and other insect-borne illness that love warmth and water. In much of tropical Africa, there is no long, cold pause to break the cycle. The burden can be constant, an unrelenting tax on energy and labor. And yet humans respond with intelligence, with careful movement, with knowledge of plants, with social systems tuned to survive. Now return to the idea of compounding. A small advantage in surplus can support a few extra specialists, and those specialists can raise surplus again. Over centuries, this becomes a spiral, not proof of better minds, proof of better conditions for a spiral to keep spinning. When you are ready, we will keep walking along this chain, one link at a time, until the modern world appears, not as a mystery, but as an echo. For a moment, imagine you are holding two seeds in your palm. One is a grain that dries hard and waits, patient in a jar. The other is food that feeds you well but resists waiting. It sprouts. It rots. It must be eaten soon. It demands constant attention. Neither seed is noble. Neither seed is inferior. But one seed invites granaries, and granaries invite scribes. The other invites movement, sharing, memory, and an art of living close to the season. Now imagine two animals watching you. One animal lowers its head and follows a leader, and in that habit there is a door for humans to step through. The other animal watches you with bright, wary eyes, ready to bite, ready to bolt. and no door opens. When you place seeds and animals and climate on the same table, you begin to see why history tilts, without ever needing to claim that people tilt. This is the calm clarity I want to leave you with tonight. The past was not a contest of souls. It was a contest of circumstances. And the winners were often the ones who happened to stand where the wind and the soil and the herd animals made winning easier. The fire has settled into a quieter phase now, the kind where the flames no longer leap. They simply hold their shape, steady and patient, as if they have decided to listen with us. I keep the map in mind, but I do not stare at it anymore. I let it rest at the edge of vision, like a dark landscape outside a window. Tonight we follow one thread more closely, the animal thread, because it is one of the strangest places where fate hid its hand. If you were here beside me, you would hear a soft scrape as I draw a small wooden bowl toward us, and inside it, in my imagination, there are no coins, no Yules, only names. A short list of creatures that agreed to live with us. That list is smaller than most people expect. Only a handful of large mammals ever became true partners. Not visitors. Not trophies. Not animals that can be used once and then lost. But animals that could be bred, guided, and counted on year after year. I want you to picture the moment of first approach. A human stands at the edge of a herd. Dust hangs low over the ground. The herd is a moving wall of warmth, breath, muscle, and flicking tails. You can smell the sharpness of dung, the dry sweetness of grass, the oily animal scent that clings to hide. The human does not rush. A rush makes every living thing become lightning. So the human waits. A slow step forward. A pause. A longer pause. The herd watches. Some animals lower their heads and return to grazing. Some shift sideways to keep distance. And one animal, somewhere, makes a choice that will echo for thousands of years. That choice is not intelligence. It is not morality. It is a temperament written into nerves. It is a social structure written into instinct. Some herd animals carry a kind of ladder inside their group. There is a leader. There is a second. There are ranks. When a human learns to step into that ladder, to guide the leader, the rest often follow. It is a quiet crack in the wall. A door. Horses had that door. Cattle had that door. Sheep and goats had that door. Pigs had a different kind of door. A willingness to live close to human waste and turn it into meat. Camels had a door shaped like endurance, a patience with thirst and distance. Water buffalo had a door shaped like mud and labor in flooded fields. Even smaller animals like chickens brought a door, a way to reproduce quickly, to become food with little delay. Now picture Africa again. So many large mammals, more than in most other places. The grasslands move with bodies. Antelope in endless variety. Buffalo with heavy heads. Elephants like living hills. Hippos that look slow until they are not. And zebras. Zebras with stripes that seem made of shadow and moonlight, as if the night painted them for its own reasons. It is easy to look at a zebra and think horse. Many humans did. Ancient people did. Empire builders did. Modern colonists did. They saw the same general size, the same shape of legs, the same grazing mouth, the same herd life. They imagined saddles, plows, carts. They imagined a quick solution to distance. And then they reached for the rope. A zebra does not accept the rope the way a horse can. A zebra turns its head with a suddenness that feels like a blade. It bites and holds. It kicks as if the air itself has become an enemy. It does not calm with age. Often it becomes more defensive, more intense. Its social life does not offer the same ladder to step into. There is no single leader that commands obedience in the same way. There are bonds. There are small groups. There is movement, but not the kind of hierarchy humans can borrow. So the rope becomes a symbol, not of human failure, of biological refusal. You can imagine an Egyptian handler in the old world, standing in painted sunlight beside a palace wall. A zebra is led forward, because it can be led for a time. The handler holds tight, hands white with strain. The zebra moves, but the muscles under its hide do not soften. It is a tense cooperation, a temporary truce. It is not a partnership that can be scaled across fields and villages. It cannot become an engine. The Romans tried to, in their way. They imported wonders from every corner, and still the zebra remained what it was. A handful of individuals could be trained, but the species did not shift. One photograph centuries later would show a zebra in harness, and people would point and say it is done. But one animal is not a system. A system is something you can repeat in 10 villages, then 100, then 1,000. This is the bitter part of the animal story. In Eurasia, most of the large mammals that became domestic partners were present. In Africa, the large mammals were spectacular, but the ones that mattered for plow and cart and cavalry did not line up the same way. It is not that Africa had nothing. People farmed. People built states. People traded across deserts and coasts. But the absence of certain animal doors meant the cost of many tasks stayed in human muscle. Now feel that cost, slowly. Imagine a farmer preparing land by hand. The soil is heavy. It holds water, or it breaks into dust, depending on the season. A hoe rises and falls. Each swing is a small decision of energy. Each swing is time. When you work by hand, fields are smaller. When fields are smaller, surplus is smaller. When surplus is smaller, fewer people can step away from the field. And when fewer people can step away, the number of specialists grows more slowly. Now imagine the same task with draft animals. The plow blade cuts deeper. The animal pulls with weight that does not belong to a single human back. A field expands. A harvest grows. Grain fills baskets. And if grain can be stored, it becomes food, not just for the family, but for the potter, the metal worker, the scribe, the sailor, the soldier. This is where the animal thread binds to the story of cities. Cities are not just buildings. They are people who are fed by someone else. They are density. They are collisions of ideas. And density is expensive. It demands surplus Now carry the animal thread into warfare. A horse is not just transport. It is speed. It is height. It is a moving platform for a rider. It changes how conflict works. It changes how far power can reach. It changes how quickly a message can travel. In places where horses and other riding animals spread, they did not just make life easier. They made states possible at different scales. In much of sub-Saharan Africa, even when horses arrived, another gate appeared, smaller than a fingernail, yet stronger than many walls. The tsetse fly, a soft, winged thing in humid air. A bite that leaves behind parasites that make cattle and horses sick. In wide regions, a horse can die before it becomes a stable part of life. So even imported animals do not become a simple solution. The environment refuses again. Now we reach the darkest twist in the animal thread. Every domesticated animal is also a reservoir, a quiet sleeping room for germs. When humans live close to animals, when they milk them, butcher them, sleep near them, and breathe the same air, pathogens get chances. They try doors too. A virus tries to live in a new body. A bacterium tests a new host. Most fail. A few succeed. When they succeed, they move into the human population, and in dense towns, they become constant visitors. This is not a romantic process. It is suffering. Children with fevers, families losing members again and again. But over a long time, a population that has endured repeated outbreaks can become more resistant. Not immune, but hardened. The way hands harden under work. Survivors have children. Their children face the same germs, and some survive again. This is how a disease package forms. Not planned. Not chosen. It is an accidental inheritance of pain. Now imagine contact between two worlds. A ship comes to shore. Its wood smells of salt and tar. Sails hang like pale cloth in a damp wind. Men step down carrying metal and cloth and new words. And in their bodies, without intent, there are invisible passengers. Smallpox, measles, influenza, other illnesses that grew from animal doors and city density. To the visitors, these diseases may feel familiar, a hardship, but often survivable. To people who have never met them, they can be a scythe through a field. Not because anyone is weaker in soul, because the germs are new. The immune system has no memory. The body meets the unknown and struggles in the dark. This is one reason conquest can begin before battle. It is one reason whole regions can be emptied before treaties are signed. It is one reason history can tilt without a single general giving an order. When you think about it in this slow light, you can feel how unfair it is, how cold. A herd animal that accepts a rope leads to surplus. Surplus leads to dense towns. Dense towns lead to animal diseases becoming human diseases. Those diseases become invisible weapons when ships cross oceans. And then, later, people look at the wreckage and invent stories about superiority. But we do not do that here. Here we simply watch the chain, one link at a time. A rope in a hand, a hoofprint in dust, a fly in humid air, a cough in a crowded room, a sail on a horizon. If you want, imagine we are walking through a museum again. The lights dimmed, the hush thick. In one glass case, a horse bit. In another, a zebra skull with teeth that looked too certain. In another, a clay tablet with records of grain. In another, a small bone needle, evidence of clothes, evidence of adaptation. The objects do not speak, but they hint. They whisper the same lesson. History is often built on quiet agreements between species and on quiet refusals. In the next part, we will move from animals to the other invisible shapers, climate and disease that live in air and water, the heat that never breaks, the humidity that spoils stores, the parasites that do not take winters off. We will feel how those forces can slow population growth, limit surplus, and make certain kinds of states harder to maintain, even as brilliance and courage remain the same. For now, let the animal thread rest like a warm blanket over your thoughts. Let the firelight soften it. Let the hoof prints fade. And keep one gentle idea in your mind as you drift. The world you see today was not built by different kinds of humans. It was built by the land, the herd, and the tiny creatures that rode between them. Before we leave this thread, I want to hold the number in my palm for a moment. 14. That is the count of large mammals that became fully domesticated in all of human history, across all continents. When I say it softly, it feels like a small stone. 14 doors that opened, while hundreds stayed shut. You can almost hear the silence behind the shut ones, the untaken paths, the roads that never formed. Each domesticated animal is like a lever. A lever lets a small force move a heavy thing. So a few levers in one place can lift a great weight. Plows carve deeper. Carts carry more. Riders travel farther. Milk stretches food into tomorrow. Wool becomes warmth. And warmth becomes the ability to stay through winter and keep a child alive. When the levers are missing, people do not become less brilliant. They simply spend more of their brilliance on the basics. On carrying, on digging, on guarding, on the daily negotiation with distance and fatigue. That is the quiet tragedy inside this story. Not a tragedy of minds, but of minutes. So many minutes paid for the same tasks, again and again. Let that thought settle like ash. Not blame, not praise, just an explanation that lets the old myths loosen their grip. Stay with that museum hush a little longer. We drift past a simple wooden yoke on dark cloth. It looks humble, but if you imagine it fitted across oxen, you can hear a field change its sound. The scrape of wood, the slow grunt, the plow blade drawing a long line through soil that has been waiting. Behind it, a human follows, feet sinking a little with each step. The air smells of turned earth and warm animal skin. A few steps later, there is a saddle, worn leather, cracked where years of sweat dried. If you lift it in your mind, it feels heavier than it should, not because of weight, but because distance shrinks under it. A messenger crosses a plain before sunset. A warning arrives too late. This is what I mean when I say the chain is quiet. No one wakes and says the zebra will not be tamed. Therefore, my grandchildren will live differently. They simply wake. They gather water. They work. They love. They endure. Now, let the museum doors close in your mind. We return to the fireplace. The ember glow pulses, and with each pulse the animal thread loosens. Not gone, just resting. In the next part, we will step into the air itself, into heat and rain, into soils that rebuild slowly or wash away quickly, into insects that carry sickness, into rivers that break into rapids. The fire makes a small sound now, a soft settling, as if the room itself is exhaling. We left the animals resting in their stalls of memory. Now we step into the air, because air is where the next pressure lives. Heat, moisture, rain that arrives like a curtain, rain that does not arrive at all, and the small flying things that follow water as faithfully as shadows follow a body. If you were standing here with me, I would open an old door in the mind and let you smell two different worlds at once. One is a temperate field after a cold night. The air is sharp. The ground is firm. There is a clean dryness in the straw, as if time has paused. The other is a tropical morning. Warmth already present before the sun has fully climbed. Moisture on leaves. Soil that holds water like a sponge and then gives it back as steam. You can feel it on your skin even without moving. Neither world is kinder. They are simply different. But those differences decide what is easy to store, what is easy to move, what is easy to grow, and how many people can safely gather in one place. Start with soil, because soil is slow. It is not just dirt. It is a long conversation between rock, water, plants, and time. In many temperate zones, winter is a pause button. Cold slows decay. Leaves fall and sit. Organic matter builds. Year after year, the ground becomes deeper and darker, a quiet wealth. A farmer can return to the same field again and again, and if they care for it, it keeps giving. In much of the tropics, time moves faster. Heat and moisture speed everything up. Leaves fall and vanish quickly. Nutrients cycle fast and wash away fast. The ground can look rich because plants grow thickly. But once you clear the cover, the sun and rain can strip the thin top layer with shocking speed. A field can feed you well for a season or two. Then it tires. It needs rest, not for weeks, for years. So people learn shifting patterns. They move plots. They let forest return. They farm like someone stepping carefully across stones in a river. This is skill. It is knowledge. It is not failure. But it shapes population. When farming requires more land per person and more time for land to recover, settlements spread out. Distance grows between households. And distance, as we already felt, is expensive. Now add storage. In a temperate climate, there is often a long, cold season. That sounds harsh, and it is. But cold is also a preservative. Grain can sit dry. Meat can be smoked and kept. Roots can be stored in cool earth. Winter creates a clear rhythm. Harvest, then hold. Hold, then plant again. In hot, humid climates, food wants to change. Mold wakes quickly. Insects find everything. A storehouse is never just a storehouse. It is a battle. People invent brilliant methods. Drying, smoking, fermenting, turning milk to sour, turning fruit to alcohol, turning grain to porridge, and then to something that lasts a little longer. But the simple act of keeping a mountain of food through many months is harder. Surplus leaks away into the mouths of insects, into rot, into the air. And surplus is what feeds specialization. A society can have genius, art, and complex politics without huge surplus. But huge surplus makes certain kinds of institutions easier. Standing armies, large bureaucracies, full-time craftsmen, long chains of teachers, libraries that can be copied for generations. Now we come to the darker companion of heat and moisture. Disease. Not the dramatic kind that arrives once and leaves. The grinding kind that stays. The kind carried by water and by mosquitoes and by flies, and by worms that live half in a snail and half in a human body. It is hard to speak of this softly, but we can, because we do not need images. We only need the weight of it. Imagine a child in a village near warm water. Evening comes. The air cools slightly. Mosquitoes rise like a whisper. A small bite. Nothing. Then fever. Then weakness. And then, if the child survives, it can happen again, and again, and again. Malaria does not always end with one encounter. It returns. It drains. It can make growth slower. It can make the body spend more energy on recovery than on building. Now imagine a whole region living under that pressure for thousands of years. Not just malaria, but many local infections. Sleeping sickness in some places. River blindness in others. Parasites in the belly that steal nutrients. Illness that flares and fades. Flares and fades. Like a candle that never fully goes out. People adapt. Bodies adapt. Genes shift. Some variants protect against one disease, but bring another cost. A trait that harms when doubled can help when single. It is the cruel logic of survival. And in this arms race, there is a strange kind of triumph. The population persists, but the cost is constant. Children die more often. Adults lose workdays. Communities carry the burden of care. If you have ever tried to do anything difficult while sick, you already understand the story. Now imagine building roads, walls, and canals while sickness keeps returning. Not impossible. People did it. But it is like building with a steady wind pushing against you. Now return to the tsetse fly, because it is a key hinge. A small living barrier. In wide belts of Africa, cattle and horses are not just hard to keep, they are killed by the parasites the fly carries. This means animal power does not spread smoothly. It means herds cannot always serve as stored wealth. It means plows pulled by animals, and carts, and long-distance cavalry are limited or absent in places where the fly thrives. And when animal power is limited, the human body becomes the engine. Porters carry goods. Farmers dig by hand. Armies move slower because supplies move slower. Trade exists, but it takes more effort per mile. Again, not because of a lack of planning, because of a small insect that does not care. Now, you might think colder climates sound easier, but they have their own sharp teeth. Winter kills. Cold demands shelter. Cold demands fuel. But winter also kills many insects. It interrupts parasite life cycles. It resets some disease pressures each year. That does not make temperate life safe. It makes it different. Some diseases appear in pulses, epidemics that roar and then fade. Between them, communities rebuild. The rhythm is brutal, but it offers breath. In much of the tropics, the rhythm is steady. No long freeze. No long interruption. So the pressure stays close, like humidity that does not lift. Now we bring this back to the question of why certain societies grew dense and why others often remained more spread. Dense populations need food and water, and some defense against constant disease. When disease burden is high, density becomes risky. People can choose smaller units, more mobility, more flexibility. It can be an intelligent strategy. A smaller group can move away from a bad season. A decentralized system can survive a shock that would topple a large, rigid one. European observers later often misread this. They saw decentralization and assumed it meant simple minds. They did not understand it could mean a different kind of wisdom. Now feel the climate map again. Africa runs through many zones. Mediterranean coast, desert, Sahel, savanna, rainforest, more savanna, temperate south. Each zone asks for different crops, different techniques, different calendars. An idea that works in one place must be remade in another. It is like writing the same song in many keys. Possible, beautiful, but it takes time. Eurasia, wide from west to east, holds long bands of similar latitude. A crop domesticated in one temperate pocket can travel far and still recognize the seasons. A grain moves and still feels at home. A herd animal moves and still finds familiar grass. So innovations can spread with less rewriting. That spread is not intelligence. It is a highway in the shape of land. Now we turn to plants, because plants are the other half of surplus. Imagine the fertile crescent with wild wheat and barley, seeds heavy with calories, quick to ripen, easy to dry. These grains are like small stones of time. They store well. They travel well. They can feed cities. Now, imagine other crops. Sorghum and millet, tough and resilient, suited to heat and drought. Yams, generous underground, but harder to store long without sprouting or rotting. African rice, brilliant in wetlands, but tied to specific water management. Teff in highlands, coffee in certain altitudes. Each is an answer to local conditions. Each is a gift. But the gifts differ in how easily they become long-term stored surplus, and how easily they spread across climate boundaries. So agriculture in Africa becomes a patchwork of excellence. Many revolutions, not one. Meanwhile, in Eurasia, a package spreads. Grain and herd mammals together, feeding one another, fertilizing fields, pulling plows, producing milk, wool, meat. When packages spread, progress can compound faster. One village improves a plow. Another refines a harness. Another breeds a stronger ox. Another builds a granary that stays dry. Each improvement travels. In Africa, improvements travel too, along rivers, along caravan routes, along coastlines. But the route is often harder. Deserts that demand camels. Forests that demand patience. Rivers with rapids. Diseases that punish long stays. So the network is powerful, but sometimes thinner, sometimes more fragile. None of this erases African empires. Mali, Songhai, Aksum, Great Zimbabwe, Swahili city-states. These were not shadows. They were real, built with sweat and knowledge, with trade and law and art. But when we ask why certain kinds of industrial and naval power rose where they did, we have to keep these slow pressures in view, because then we reach the moment when ships matter, not just as boats, but as long-distance machines of projection. On the Atlantic edge, Europe had many harbors, many peninsulas, many small seas to practice on. Sailors learned in protected waters. Ports traded with ports. Navigation became habit. Competition pushed ship design forward because neighbors watched each other. Africa has long coasts, but many stretches are open and surf-beaten. There are great maritime zones too, especially on the east, where monsoon winds carried trade across the Indian Ocean. But the overall shape offered fewer natural pockets for constant small-scale sea competition. So when one region becomes obsessed with ocean travel, and another invests more into inland routes and regional resilience, their toolkits diverge. Now hold all these pressures together, like stones in two bowls. In one bowl, temperate soils, storable grains, draft animals, intermittent disease pulses, dense competition among many states. In the other bowl, diverse climate zones, harder storage in many regions, heavy tropical disease burden, insects that limit livestock, long internal distances with difficult rivers, and brilliant local adaptations that sometimes remain local longer. When you place the bowls side by side, the outcomes begin to look less like destiny and more like arithmetic. A little more surplus here, a little more density there, a little more copying speed, a little more interruption from disease. Over centuries, small differences become large. This is not comforting. It is quiet and cold, because it means many lives were shaped by factors no one chose. In the next part, we will step from these slow pressures into the sharper edge of collision. How ships turned geography into chains. How trade became extraction. How borders drawn far away froze complex realities into unnatural shapes. and how people later told stories about race to hide the simpler truth. For now, let the room stay dim. Let your jaw unclench. Let the breath slow. Feel the warmth of the blanket, or the sheet, or the air around your skin. And let the heat and rain of distant centuries fade into a soft background, still there, but no longer sharp. Honestly, I have always found it strange how our minds crave a single villain. We want one bad leader, one cruel decision, one moment where everything turned. But the deeper villains in history are often patient. They are seasons. They are flies. They are fungi in grain. They are the slow fatigue in a body that keeps surviving fever. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the difference between a granary in a dry, cold season and a storehouse in warm, wet air. In the first, there is silence, grain sleeping, dust floating in a narrow beam of light. In the second, there is a soft rustle, insects testing seams, the faint, sweet smell of fermentation starting where it should not. A caretaker checks baskets, turns them, moves them, hopes for a little wind. Even the act of walking changes. In cool air, you can walk longer before thirst insists. In heavy heat, every step asks for water, and water ties you to rivers and wells. It is another quiet leash, and another quiet teacher. The fire does not hurry. It makes light the way a tide makes shape, slowly, almost without effort. I keep my voice low because the next chapter is the one that many people prefer to skip. Not because it is complicated, because it is painful. It is the moment when small advantages turned into a machinery that could reach across water, and when geography stopped being quiet and became a blade. If you were here beside me, I would ask you to imagine standing on a shoreline at dusk. The air tastes of salt. A thin wind combs over the surface of the sea and leaves a faint pattern, like a hand smoothing cloth. Behind you, the land smells of smoke and cooking, of warm dust, of animals, of people settling for the night. Ahead of you, the horizon is a dark line. For most of human time, that line was an ending, a limit. Then, in a few centuries, it became a road. A ship is a strange thing. It is wood that pretends it can be a creature. It has ribs and a skin of planks, and it breathes through sails. You can hear it before you see it. A low groan of timber, a rhythm of water against hull, a soft clatter of rope. When it arrives close to shore, it carries more than people and goods. It carries habits. It carries expectations. It carries the idea that distance is something you can buy your way through. Europe had been learning ships for a long time, in sheltered seas, in narrow channels, in coasts full of inlets where a small boat could practice without dying on the first mistake. Competition did what it always does. It made the tools sharper, better sails, better maps, better ways to keep records of what worked. And behind those improvements sat grain surplus and draft animals and the quiet bureaucracies that could tax and pay and build. None of that made any person more human than another. It simply made some states better at turning stored food into stored power. Now picture the first meetings along the West African coast, in the age when European ships began to creep farther and farther down. At first, it did not always look like conquest. It looked like trade. A small boat rowing toward a familiar port. Voices calling across water. Hands showing goods. Cloth. Metal tools. Glass beads that caught sunlight and made people smile. Gold dust in small pouches. Ivory. Pepper. Human beings on both sides doing what humans do, trying to secure advantage for their own community. But trade has a shadow when it is backed by cannon. A cannon does not need to be fired many times to change a conversation. It only needs to exist. A metal mouth pointing outward from a ship can turn a negotiation into a warning. Even when it stays silent, it is felt. And then the world across the ocean began to pull like a hook. The Americas. Fast land. New crops. Sugar that could be grown in hot fields and sold for cold money. Tobacco. Cotton. Silver. The kind of wealth that makes rulers lean forward in their chairs. The kind of wealth that makes merchants forget what a human face means. Those new colonies had a problem. Labor. Indigenous populations were dying in immense numbers from diseases they had never met before. Diseases carried on breath and skin, carried without intent, carried the way a spark is carried in a pocket and then drops into dry grass. So European powers looked for a replacement, and they chose the most brutal option available. They chose to treat people as cargo. It did not begin everywhere as random raiding by strangers. It often began through local conflicts and local bargains. African states and leaders, like states everywhere, had rivals. They fought. They captured prisoners. They sought leverage. When foreign traders offered goods in exchange for captives, some groups accepted, believing they were making a hard choice that served their own survival. It is a terrible truth. It is also a human truth. People under pressure sometimes choose the option that harms someone else because it seems to protect their own children. But once the trade began, the logic changed. Demand grew. Profit hardened. The system learned to feed itself. Raids increased. Wars shifted purpose. Capturing people became its own economy. The coast began to feel haunted. Not by ghosts, but by absence. A village missing its young adults. A field untended because the hands were gone. A child carried inland to hide when rumors of a raid rose with the morning smoke. If you could float above the forests and savannas during those centuries, you would see movement that does not look like migration. Lines of people forced to walk, dust rising from their feet. Quiet, because noise invites cruelty. Rivers crossed, rope marks on wrists, a kind of numbness settling in the face, because feeling everything all the time would break a body from the inside. At the coast, there were forts, stone and wood built to hold people the way barns hold animals. The air inside those walls was thick. Salt, sweat, fear, a waiting that stretched into days and weeks. Outside, the sea kept breathing as it always had. Inside, time became small and sharp. Then the ships. the Middle Passage. I will not paint it in detail. You do not need detail to understand the weight. Imagine a room with almost no air movement. Bodies pressed together. The sound of waves above. Darkness. The smell of sickness. The mind trying to leave the body because staying present hurts too much. Some survived. Many did not. The ocean received them with the same indifference it gives to storms. And when those ships reached the Americas, the horror did not end. It simply changed shape. Plantations, long rows, sun, whips. A calendar built around extraction. A human life measured in how many cane stalks could be cut, how many bales could be lifted, how many years before the body failed. Now hold a quieter truth beside this darkness. The wealth that flowed into Europe from sugar and cotton and silver did not appear by magic. It was made. It was funded by stolen time, by stolen bodies, by stolen futures. Banks grew. Ports expanded. Factories rose. Researchers and inventors were supported by systems that had learned how to turn forced labor into capital. So when people ask why the Industrial Revolution happened where it did, it is not enough to point to coal and cleverness. You also have to point to ships that carried chained people outward and carried profit inward. At the same time, Africa was being drained, not only of people, but of stability. Trust between communities cracked. Coastal regions became dangerous. Inland states armed themselves. A pattern of fear hardened. A continent that had produced scholarship and trade and empire was being forced into a role that served someone else. This is what underdevelopment looks like. Not a natural absence. Not a reversal. A siphon. And then, when the slave trade began to be outlawed in some places, another phase arrived. Colonial extraction. Rubber. Gold. Diamonds. Copper. Timber. Palm oil. Coffee. Cocoa. The desire shifted from owning people to owning land and the labor that could be coerced upon it. In the late 19th century, European leaders met in Berlin and drew lines across a map. No African voices at the table. Lines that ignored languages, kinship, trade routes, existing states. Those lines became borders. They became the frame for future conflict because they cut through realities that had taken centuries to form. Colonial rule often used a simple logic: build railways from mine to port, not from village to village. Build schools that train clerks, not schools that train engineers. Allow local industry only when it does not compete. Export raw material. Import finished goods. Keep the flow one way. When people lived inside those systems, their lives were shaped by rules written in foreign capitals. Taxes that demanded cash pushed farmers toward cash crops. Cash crops pushed land use away from local food security. Traditional authority structures were bent or broken. Sometimes colonial powers used indirect rule, sometimes direct, but the purpose stayed steady. Extraction. And then came the stories. Stories that tried to make this look normal. Stories that said Africans were backward. Stories that said Europeans were destined. Stories that turned adaptation into hierarchy and turned history into biology. It was a neat trick. Break a place, then point to the break and say it was always broken. If you feel a heaviness in your chest while listening, that is a sane response. But let the heaviness be held by the firelight. We are not here to drown in despair. We are here to see clearly. Because clarity is a kind of calm. When you understand the chain, you stop blaming the wrong links. So tonight, as you rest, keep one image in your mind. A ship at night, lanterns on deck, waves black and steady. Inside the hull, cargo that should never have been called cargo. Above the deck, men who think they are making history, when really they are revealing something older. The human ability to turn another human into an object. When profit and distance make the face feel far away. In the next part, we will soften the focus and look again at bodies and traits. Skin color, limb length, hair texture, and we will treat them as footprints of climate, not as banners of worth. We will let the false ladder of race dissolve. For now, let the sea go quiet. Let the ship fade. Let the room return. Listen to your breath. Listen to the small sound of the fire settling. The story continues, but you do not need to carry it with clenched fists. You can hold it with open hands and let it become understanding, not panic. The room here is safe, a small circle of safety made by light. Still, it helps to notice what happens in your own body when a story like this arrives. The shoulders rise. The jaw tightens. The stomach pulls inward. So we do the opposite. Let the shoulders slide down. Let the jaw loosen. Let the tongue rest behind the teeth. Let the breath move in and out as if it is polishing the inside of your ribs with warmth. Because there is another layer to this history, a quieter one, and it is important. After the borders were drawn and the rail lines were laid, colonial power did not only move through guns and laws. It moved through words, through schoolrooms where a child learned that the heroes were always elsewhere, through documents that renamed rivers and towns as if naming could replace memory, through offices where a local language was treated as noise and a foreign language became the key that unlocked wages, permits, protection. Imagine a classroom with dust in the air, chalk on a board, the scrape of a wooden bench, a child listening, eyes wide, trying to understand why their own grandmother's story is called superstition, while a distant king's story is called history. That kind of lesson is slow poison. It does not kill quickly. It changes what a person thinks is normal. It teaches them to look at their own hands and doubt them. This is why the old myth of superiority was so useful. It was not only meant to excuse what had already been taken, it was meant to make resistance feel unreasonable. It was meant to make the stolen seem inevitable. And when a story is repeated long enough, it can begin to feel like weather. It can begin to feel like it always existed, like it cannot be changed. But weather changes. Across Africa, people adapted and resisted in ways that do not always fit into simple narratives. Some negotiated. Some hid. Some fought. Some kept knowledge alive by folding it into songs and rituals. so it could not be easily confiscated. Some scholars kept writing in manuscripts even when printing presses were elsewhere. Some communities moved inland to escape raids, carrying seeds and memories, turning migration into survival. If you listen closely, you can hear a continent trying to keep itself intact while pieces are being pulled away. You can hear it in the rhythm of footsteps on hard ground, in the creak of a cart, in the low chant of a work song, in the hush of a library room where pages are turned carefully because paper is fragile and time is not. And now, tonight, in a different century, we sit with the aftermath still around us, like soot that has settled into the corners of a room. Global inequality that looks like a natural landscape, but was shaped by specific hands, specific deals, specific laws. When you remember that, shame begins to lose its grip. Blame begins to find its true target. Confusion begins to clear. Hold on to that clearing. We will need it, because the next chapter is about the body, about skin and hair and shape, and it is easy for old stories to crawl back in if we do not keep the room lit. So let us keep the candlelight steady. Let the sea stay outside. Let the dust fall gently. We will continue, step by step, into the calm truth that difference is adaptation, not rank, and that the past explains the present without excusing the harm. The fire has burned down a little, and the room feels softer, as if the shadows have learned where to sit. I want to shift the story now, away from ships and borders, toward something closer. The body, the face, the skin that touches air, because this is where many people get tangled. They look at human differences and they imagine deep separate categories, as if nature built walls between us. Nature did not build walls. Nature drew gradients. If you were standing here with me, I would hold my hand out toward the candlelight and let you see how the skin changes with angle. A pale patch becomes warmer near flame. A darker patch reflects light differently, not less, simply differently. Both are skin. Both are living tissue filled with the same quiet work. Blood moving, cells repairing, nerves listening. And yet, for centuries, people tried to turn these small variations into a ladder. It helps to remember what skin is for. Skin is not a flag. Skin is a boundary that negotiates with the sun. The sun sends ultraviolet light. You cannot see it, but you can feel its consequences. Too much of it breaks DNA in skin cells. Too much of it burns. Too much of it can increase the risk of cancer later in life. Even earlier than that, ultraviolet light can break down folate in the bloodstream. Folate is needed for healthy pregnancies, for early development, for the formation of new cells. In a world without supplements, without hospitals, losing folate was not an abstract risk. It was the difference between a pregnancy that continues and one that does not. Now, on the other side of the bargain, the same sun is needed to make vitamin D. Vitamin D is not a luxury. Without enough of it, bones soften, immune systems weaken. Children can grow with painful deformities. In places with long winters and weak light, vitamin D can become a silent, limiting factor on survival. So skin sits in the middle of a trade. Protect folate. Make vitamin D. Do both well enough to keep a line of ancestors alive. The tool that evolution uses for this is melanin. Melanin is a pigment, a kind of natural screen within skin cells. More melanin means more protection from ultraviolet overload. Less melanin means more ultraviolet can pass through, helping vitamin D production when light is scarce. In places where the sun is strong for much of the year, near the equator, selection favored more melanin. Darker skin was armor. It guarded folate. It reduced the damage from relentless light. It was not a badge of identity. It was a solution. In places where sunlight is weaker and more seasonal, especially in far northern latitudes, that same armor can become too thick. Too much melanin can block too much ultraviolet. The vitamin D factory slows over thousands of years. In those environments, individuals with slightly lighter skin could gain a small advantage. They could make enough vitamin D to keep bones strong and pregnancies safer. Over many generations, those small advantages can shift the average tone of a population. None of this is moral. It is arithmetic. And it is recent. Far more recent than people assume. In the deep span of human time, the most dramatic changes in European skin pigmentation likely happened in the last several thousand years. A small slice. A few hundred generations. If human history were a long night, these pigment changes would be close to morning, not in the ancient dark. Now step away from skin and look at bodies. Why do some populations, on average, have longer limbs and leaner frames, while others have shorter limbs and more compact builds? There is a quiet logic here too. Heat. A body is a furnace. It makes warmth even when it is still. When it moves, it makes more. In hot climates, the danger is overheating. In cold climates, the danger is losing heat too quickly. A tall, narrow body with long arms and legs has more surface area relative to its mass. That means it can shed heat more easily. It is like a radiator. In very hot environments, this can help a person stay cooler while walking, working, carrying, hunting. The broader body has less surface area relative to its mass. That means it holds heat more effectively. In cold environments, this can help a person survive long nights and bitter winds. Biologists gave these patterns names. Bergman rule, Allen rule. You do not need the names. You only need the feeling. A cold wind across bare skin. A hot sun above a dry plain. The body responds over generations, like clay, slowly shaped by the same hands. Even hair texture can be understood this way. Tightly curled hair can lift away from the scalp, creating tiny air spaces that reduce heat from direct sunlight while allowing airflow. Straighter hair can hang and insulate differently. Again, not better. Different answers to different questions. And then there are diseases, the invisible sculptors. In regions where malaria was common, certain genetic variants offered partial protection. Sickle cell trait is one famous example. Carrying one copy of the variant can make red blood cells less friendly to the malaria parasite. But carrying two copies can cause severe illness. This is what evolution does when it is under pressure. It makes trade-offs. It chooses the option that keeps more children alive in a particular environment, even if the option has pain built into it. These traits, skin tone, body shape, hair texture, disease resistance, are not proof of separate kinds of humans. They are proof that one kind of human can be tuned in many ways. Now, here is the part that still surprises people. When geneticists compare human genomes, the differences between any two people are tiny. Not zero, but small. Most variation is shared across populations, not neatly separated by continents. If you line up humans across the world, you do not find clean boxes. You find overlapping waves of frequencies, and you find something else. Africa holds the greatest genetic diversity on Earth, not because Africans are different in some essential way, because Africa is where our species spent the most time. More time means more variation had time to accumulate. When small groups left Africa, they carried only a subset of that diversity. A sample, like a handful of seeds taken from a vast forest. This is why you can find more genetic variation within one African community than across huge numbers of people elsewhere. It is not an insult. It is a record of age. So the folk categories people invented, black, white, Asian, race, these are cultural stories built on top of small biological gradients. There is no single gene that draws a border. There is no sharp line in DNA where one race ends and another begins. There are only local adaptations and shifting mixtures. If you hold this idea gently, it changes how you see the past. The violence of slavery and colonialism did not happen because one group was more evolved. It happened because small geographic advantages compounded into ships and guns and disease exposure. And then those tools were used to seize and redirect. People made choices. Institutions made choices. Geography provided the initial slope, and human greed turned that slope into a slide. And it changes how you see yourself. Your body carries faint signatures of environments your ancestors endured. Maybe your skin holds more melanin because your lineage lived under fierce light. Maybe it holds less because your lineage lived where sunlight was weak. Maybe your blood carries a variant shaped by ancient malaria. Maybe your bones reflect generations of cold or heat. These are not rankings. They are survival notes written in flesh. As you lie there listening, try this. Imagine the planet as a dark sphere with thin bands of light where day is happening right now. Under each band, people live. Some in humid heat, some in dry cold, some by rivers, some in mountains, all breathing, all dreaming, all carrying the same deep human blueprint that formed in Africa long ago. The same capacity for language, laughter, grief, invention, cruelty, care. The tragedy is that humans saw these small differences and built hierarchies. They turned adaptation into excuse. They used skin as alibi. They drew borders in the mind that do not exist in biology. But the calm truth is still there, like a steady ember. One species, many local answers. In the next part, We will look at how those answers became stories, how myths of superiority were taught, how they can be untaught, and how history can be held without hatred, only with clarity. For now, let your breathing stay slow. Let the candlelight stay steady. Let the old false ladder fall away, rung by rung, until there is only a wide ground beneath you, and on that ground, all humans standing, different in shade and shape, but equal in the ancient fact of being alive. If you have ever walked through a museum late in the day, you know the feeling. The air is cooler than outside. Footsteps sound too loud even when you try to be gentle. Glass cases hold bones, tools, beads, bits of clay, small things that survived because they were hidden under sediment and silence. There is a hush that feels almost like snow. In that hush, you can meet the truth without argument. A skull in a case is not a banner. It is a home that once held a mind. A femur is not a symbol. It is a lever that once lifted a body up a hill. When you look at those bones, you can sometimes see the environment written into them. A broad pelvis, a narrow one, a thick rib cage, a long shin. It is not destiny in the sense of worth. It is the memory of weather. And in a modern laboratory, the same story continues in a different language. The room is bright. Machines hum like distant insects. A technician wears gloves that squeak softly when fingers move. On a screen, letters appear, a long string of code. Not a moral code, a chemical code. When researchers look at those letters, they do not see race. They see patterns, variants that cluster where malaria was, variants that cluster where milk became common in adult diets, variants that cluster where cold demanded different fats and different heat balance. The genome is an archive, but it is an archive of pressures, not of value. Honestly, I have always found it strange that people can accept this idea easily in other animals and resist it in humans. We understand that a polar bear and a brown bear are shaped by different environments, and we do not say one is superior. We understand that desert plants and rainforest plants have different leaves, and we do not rank their leaves like trophies. But when it comes to our own species, fear and history whisper in the ear and say, make a ladder, make a story, make an excuse. Yet the body itself keeps refusing the ladder. Move a family from one latitude to another, and in one lifetime you can see how flexible humans are. Skin tans when it can. Diets change. Bodies learn new rhythms of sun and sleep. Over many generations, gene frequencies shift, but the person born in any place is still a human, still capable of the same deep things: learning, empathy, invention, rage, tenderness. Evolution shapes the surface. Culture shapes meaning. The core stays stubbornly shared. There is also a gentler point, one that is easy to miss. Adaptation does not only happen in genes. It happens in behavior. People in hot climates learn to rest at noon, to work in morning and late afternoon, to protect water. People in cold climates learn to store, to insulate, to build walls that keep wind out. These are not signs of laziness or discipline. They are signs of intelligence applied to local reality. When outsiders misunderstand those patterns, they invent myths, and then they use the myths like tools. So when you hear someone say, "A group worked less," remember the metabolic cost of heat. When you hear someone say, "A group did not build certain kinds of cities," remember soil and storage and disease. When you hear someone say, "A group did not domesticate certain animals," remember zebras and tsetse flies and the long, slow education of herd temperaments. The world shaped outcomes. The people were people everywhere. If you want to make this even calmer in your mind, imagine each trait as a small decision made by survival. More melanin, less melanin, longer limbs, shorter limbs, a blood cell that changes shape under stress, a lactase enzyme that stays active into adulthood. None of these traits chooses a flag. They choose survival in a particular patch of Earth. The patch changes. The optimal answer changes. The human remains. Now let the museum hush return. Let the glass cases fade into darkness. Let the lab screen go dim. What remains is the simplest truth. We are one species with one deep origin, scattered and mixed and reshaped by climate, by geography, by disease, by chance. When we forget that, we create suffering. When we remember it, the mind relaxes because it no longer has to defend a false story. So breathe in, breathe out. Let the air pass through you like a quiet river. Let the old words, race, superior, inferior, drift away. You do not need them. You only need the real words: adaptation, history, environment, choice. In the next part, we will step into how choice can rebuild what history broke. Slowly, patiently, with clear eyes. The fire is low now, and the room has the kind of silence that feels heavy in a gentle way, like a blanket settling over your shoulders. In the last part, we let the false ladder of race loosen and fall away. And tonight, I want to speak about what happens after a ladder falls. People do not like empty space. When the old story collapses, the mind reaches for another story, and sometimes it reaches for the same old one, just painted a new color. If you were sitting here with me, you would hear the small sounds that prove the world is still turning. The soft crack of a log shifting, the faint whisper of air moving through a gap in a window frame, the patient rhythm of your own breath. Those sounds are ordinary. They are also a reminder. History feels huge, but it is made from ordinary moments, repeated until they become a pattern. The myth of superiority did not grow because it was true. It grew because it was useful. It made conquest feel like nature. It made theft feel like destiny. It made violence feel like order. And when a myth becomes useful to power, it learns to protect itself. It moves into school books. It moves into sermons. It moves into jokes that sound harmless until you notice who is always the punchline. It moves into the quiet way someone looks at a stranger and decides what that stranger deserves. You can see the mechanism if you look closely. First, a geographic advantage becomes a technological advantage. Then a technological advantage becomes a military advantage. Then a military advantage becomes control. Then control becomes a story that claims it was always meant to be that way. The story is the final lock on the door. In the late 19th century, when European powers carved up Africa on paper, they did not only carve borders. They carved narratives. They taught themselves that they were bringing civilization, and they taught the ruled that they were being improved. It is a strange kind of cruelty, the cruelty that pretends to be kindness. It speaks softly while it takes. It smiles while it dismantles. If you imagine an office in a colonial capital, you can almost smell the ink. Papers stacked, a fan turning slowly, the scrape of a pen, a clerk copying names into a ledger. Outside, the sun is bright. Inside, the air feels dry. The ledger is not just a list. It is a machine. It turns land into property, people into categories, taxes into numbers, and numbers into authority. Once a system is written down, it can outlive the individuals who built it. It can continue even when the original reason is forgotten. This is why writing and bureaucracy are so powerful. They are memory that does not get tired. They are instructions that can be carried across distance. They are a kind of cold magic, not supernatural, just practical. And when practical tools are used without care, they can become sharp. But Africa was never empty. Not empty of people, not empty of states, not empty of knowledge. Before colonial rule, there were empires and city-states. There were councils and kinship networks. There were markets and universities. There were libraries and oral lineages that held law and medicine inside the human voice. When outsiders claimed the land was backward, they were not describing reality. They were preparing a justification. And then, when colonial rule weakened and formal independence arrived in the 20th century, another difficult chapter opened. Flags changed. Borders remained. Economies that had been shaped for extraction did not transform overnight into economies shaped for local flourishing. Languages of administration remained foreign in many places. Education systems carried old priorities. Debts and trade terms continued to pull wealth outward. The myth did not die quickly. It lingered. If you were walking through a city after independence, you might feel hope and also exhaustion. New leaders speaking, crowds listening, a sense that the future was being written again. And beneath that, the weight of what had been removed. Skilled people lost to centuries of forced migration. Trust damaged by raids and fear. Institutions broken and replaced by systems that served someone else. Rebuilding is slow. It is slow because it is not just roads and schools. It is confidence. It is the belief that your own hands can shape the world. This is where the story becomes softer and more intimate, because the way history enters the body is often through shame. Shame is a quiet poison. It says you deserved what happened. It says your language is not valuable. It says your ancestors did not build anything worth remembering. It says your face is a mistake. Shame is not an accident. It is a tool. It keeps people from lifting their eyes. So one of the gentlest revolutions is simply refusing shame. Not with anger, not with pride that needs an enemy, just with truth. Africa is the origin of Homo sapiens. Africa holds the deepest genetic diversity. African societies built kingdoms and cities, traded across deserts and oceans, developed iron technologies and architectures and medicines suited to their environments. These are not comforting affirmations. They are facts. And facts can be soothing when they replace a lie that has been scratching at the mind for generations. You might be wondering how this connects to your own night, to your own body lying still in bed, to the small circle of light we have here. It connects because your mind is part of history. The stories you inherited shape what you feel is possible. They shape who you trust. They shape what you fear. When you understand the real engine of difference, geography, germs, animals, crops, and the compound effect of small advantages, you stop looking for superiority in blood. You start looking for leverage in systems. And once you look at systems, you can imagine changing them. That is the calming part. A ladder cannot be fixed because it is built on a lie. A landscape can be reshaped because it is real. Think of knowledge like water. In some places it moved easily, along rivers, along roads, along latitudes. In other places it had to jump barriers, deserts, forests, disease zones. The water did not stop being water. It simply found different paths. When we build new paths, when we connect universities, laboratories, libraries, schools, when we invest in health, infrastructure, and local industry, we are building channels. We are changing flow. This is not a bedtime lecture. It is a slow reassurance. The past was not destiny. It was circumstance, and circumstance can change. The same human flexibility that once made our ancestors adapt to ice ages and droughts can now be used to adapt to the damage left by empire. So let the firelight steady your thoughts. Let the idea of one human species settle in your chest like warm tea. Let the false stories loosen their hold. You do not need to solve history tonight. You only need to see it clearly enough that it stops haunting you with confusion. In the next part, we will gather the whole thread, from deep time in Africa, to the spread of crops and animals, to diseases and ships, to the myths that tried to make it all seem natural. And we will end with a simple truth. No people were destined to rule. No people were destined to be ruled. The world tilted, humans pushed, and the tilt became a fall. Knowing that, you can rest. Because the lie is not inside you. It was outside, imposed, and it can be released. Listen to the quiet in the room. Notice the way your breath already knows what to do. In and out. Slow and steady. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands unclench. Let the mind drift just a little, while the story prepares its final gentle step. There is another image that helps me when the scale feels too large. Imagine a field after harvest. Stubble. Dry stems. The scent of earth. One person walks across it with a sack of seed. Another walks with a tool. Another carries water. Alone, each person can do little. Together, they can change the field. Geography gave some fields a head start. That is true. But fields can also be tended. A dry patch can be irrigated. A barren patch can be composted. A field that has been trampled can be rested and renewed. When people talk about Europe in the centuries before global conquest, they often describe genius, or restless curiosity, or some special character. Honestly, I have always found that explanation too flattering and too thin. It ignores the grinding pressure that shaped those societies. A continent broken into many small rivals, borders close together, rivers and mountains dividing, but not sealing off. A place where a neighbor could become an enemy in a season. In such a place, the fear of falling behind becomes a constant drumbeat. Imagine a workshop near a port. Salt in the air, tar on the hands, wood shavings curling off a plane. A shipwright fits planks together and listens to the sound they make when they meet. He does not know he is part of a long chain that will reach across oceans. He is only trying to build a hull that survives one more storm. Nearby, a merchant counts coins. A sailor ties a knot again and again until it holds without thought. A map maker bends over a chart and adjusts a coastline by the width of a thumb. These are tiny changes, but when rivals copy them quickly and then improve them, the changes stack. This is how the compound interest of technology feels from the inside. It does not feel like destiny. It feels like work. It feels like hurry. It feels like not sleeping enough because another kingdom is building faster guns. It feels like raising taxes because a fleet must be paid. It feels like a blacksmith heating metal until it glows, then striking it until it obeys. It feels like a printer setting type, letter by letter, in a room that smells of ink and damp paper. Printing is worth lingering on, just for a moment, because it is a quiet monster. Before printing, knowledge traveled at the speed of copying by hand and the speed of memory. After printing, a page became a seed that could be scattered. A mistake could spread faster too. A lie could multiply. A rumor could harden into doctrine because it appeared in ink. So when Europe built stories about Africa and about other peoples, those stories traveled on paper. They did not have to be true to be effective. They only had to be repeated. They only had to look official. A pamphlet, a sermon, a school text, a scientific-sounding treatise that measured skulls and pretended it was measuring fate. This is the darkest kind of magic, the kind that dresses itself as reason. When European ships arrived with cannons, they did not arrive to meet equals in the same game. They arrived with a game that had been optimized for ocean distance and for concentrated firepower. That mismatch is part of the sorrow. It is not that African societies lacked intelligence or organization. It is that the incentives had been different. The pressures had been different. The enemies had been different. The problems worth solving had been different. I want you to feel that difference in your bones for a moment, not as blame, not as pride, just as clarity. A society fighting malaria, sleeping sickness, and the tsetse belt is spending its energy on survival in a way that does not translate into ocean fleets. A society that cannot store grain for long because heat and insects ruin it is living in a narrower margin. A society where draft animals die in certain regions cannot multiply farm labor the same way. None of this is moral. None of it is about worth. It is a landscape. And when the landscape is harsh, people become experts in different things. They learn plants. They learn seasons. They learn how to move without exhausting the soil. They learn social forms that reduce conflict when resources are uncertain. They learn to hold knowledge in song and story, because paper rots and ink fades in humidity. They learn to make beauty out of what is available: clay and wood and cloth, rhythm and voice. If you have ever listened to a lullaby from a culture far from your own and felt your body soften anyway, you know what I mean. The brain recognizes care. It recognizes rhythm. It recognizes that a human voice is trying to keep another human safe. That recognition is older than any empire. So tonight, as we prepare to close the long argument of history, let the nervous system choose the older truth. Your body belongs to a species that survived by cooperation. Even the dark chapters were written by humans who could have been different, but were trapped in systems that rewarded cruelty. That is unsettling. It is also relieving, because systems can be redesigned. You do not have to hold guilt for things you did not do. You do not have to hold shame for things done to people who look like you. You can hold understanding. Understanding is lighter. Understanding is a candle that does not burn the hand. Let the candlelight in this room stay steady. Let the fire breathe. Let the night outside remain outside. Here, in this small circle of warmth, the human story becomes simple again. We are one species, shaped by different suns and different soils. Some of us were lucky. Some of us were trapped. Many of us were both, in different ways. And now, in the present, we can choose to see each other without the old masks. The last stretch of a long road can feel quieter than the beginning. The mind has heard enough to stop gripping, and the body begins to trust that nothing is required right now except rest. So let us walk the final meters slowly, with bare feet on cool stone, with the soft warmth of the fire at our backs. I want to return to the moment we began, a small group of people in Africa, long before maps had names, long before borders were drawn with rulers. Imagine the air before dawn, a faint chill, the smell of damp earth. In the dark, you can hear insects, and far away a bird calls once, then stops. The people are close together, not because they are weak, but because closeness is a strategy. It is warmth. It is shared watchfulness. It is the oldest technology. From that closeness came language. From language came the ability to coordinate. From coordination came survival. And from survival came movement. A few families, a few hundred people, leaving a familiar landscape and stepping into the unknown. It was not a march of superiority. It was a gamble. It was curiosity mixed with pressure, drought and opportunity, fear and hunger, and the plain human impulse to see what is beyond the ridge. As they moved, the world met them with different gifts and different traps. In some places, the soil was deep and forgiving. In some places, the rain arrived on schedule. In some places, wild grasses offered seeds that were large and patient and willing to become wheat and barley. In some places, animals moved in herds with hierarchies that could be gently bent. Horses, cattle, sheep, goats. In other places, the plants were powerful but harder to store. In other places, the animals were fast and wary and angry. In some places, rivers ran like long open arms. In other places, rivers broke into rapids and falls like clenched fists. None of it was moral. It was the map the planet happened to draw. Then came germs, invisible passengers. Some grew in the shadow of domesticated animals, and over generations, the people who lived near those animals paid an awful price. Waves of illness, children lost, scars on faces, grief in houses. But the survivors carried resistance forward. In other regions, different diseases ruled. Malaria, sleeping sickness, parasites that never allowed the body to forget. A constant pressure that shaped blood and bones and daily life. Disease is one of the darkest authors in history. It writes without malice. It writes without pity. It simply writes. Geography shaped the spread of all these pressures. Across Eurasia, ideas and crops could travel along similar latitudes more easily, like a whisper passing from one ear to another in a crowded room. Across Africa, climates changed as you moved north and south, and every shift asked for reinvention. The Sahara rose like a wall of sand. Forests held their own boundaries. The tsetse fly drew lines that were not on any human map. Those lines mattered. And then, much later, ships. Ships that could hold the ocean. Ships that could carry cannons. Ships that could carry paper and contracts. Ships that could carry people who had grown used to certain disease packages and who carried them without knowing. Ships that arrived at established ports and at first spoke the language of trade, then slowly spoke the language of coercion. This is where the story becomes the darkest, not because darkness is loud, but because it is organized. The transatlantic slave trade did not only steal labor, it stole time. It stole future families. It stole the calm accumulation that lets a society build layers of knowledge and infrastructure. It turned neighbors into threats. It made war profitable in a new way. It pulled millions of people across water and left an empty space behind them, a space that cannot be filled by explanation. It can only be mourned. Colonialism followed, and it arrived with paperwork and uniforms and a steady gaze that pretended it was neutral. Borders were drawn without consent. Economies were bent toward extraction. Railways ran to ports. Schools taught foreign histories first. Local industries were blocked. And then, when the damage was deep, another story was told. That this outcome proved something about the people who suffered it. That story was the lie. The lie was the final cruelty. But there is another truth that does not need to shout. When you control for geography, for animals, for plants, for diseases, for the axis of continents, for the timing of contact and the violence of extraction, there are no superior peoples. There never were. Only humans. Humans solving the problems in front of them with the tools available. Humans making beauty where they could. Humans making mistakes that hardened into systems. Humans surviving. Now, let us bring the lens closer, back to the body. Your skin is not a badge of worth. It is a compromise with sunlight. Melanin as armor in fierce light. lighter skin as a window in weak light. Your limbs are not a measure of value. They are a conversation with temperature. Long lines that shed heat. Compact shapes that keep warmth. Your blood carries memories too. Sometimes in the form of traits that resist malaria. Sometimes in the form of immune histories built by old epidemics. These are not rankings. They are footprints. It is tempting for the mind to seek a simple villain. The truth is more unsettling. The villain is often a system that rewards cruelty and hides its own causes. The villain is a map that makes sharing difficult. The villain is a fly, a parasite, a soil chemistry, a coastline without harbors. The villain is a ledger that turns a person into a number. These are quiet villains. They do not roar. They persist. And yet, so does the human ability to persist. That is the thread I want you to carry into sleep. Not as a burden. As a warmth, the same species that once crossed deserts and glaciers can also cross the confusion left by old myths. The same minds that once learned to plant seeds can learn to build fairer systems. The same hands that once shaped stone into tools can shape institutions, schools, and networks that carry knowledge in all directions. If you were standing here with me, I would point to the dust motes drifting in the candlelight. Tiny, weightless, each one a fragment of something older. That is what history is, fragments floating. When light hits them, you can see them. When light fades, they are still there. Our task is not to carry every mote. Our task is to breathe gently and let the ones that do not belong to us fall to the floor. So settle deeper into whatever supports you. Feel the texture beneath your shoulder. Let your jaw unclench. Let your tongue rest. Let your eyes soften behind their lids. There is nothing to prove. There is no ladder to climb. There is only the slow certainty that you are part of one human family, shaped by different landscapes, all equally capable of tenderness and harm, and therefore all equally responsible for choosing tenderness when we can. The fire will keep its patient work. The night will keep its wide quiet. Somewhere far away, a river moves in the dark, not hurrying, not stopping. The river does not care about borders. It follows gravity. It follows the shape of the land. It teaches a lesson without words. Flow finds a way, and when the land changes, flow changes with it. Let that be the final image. A river breathing. Candle, smoke rising. Dust turning slowly in warm light. Your breath steady. Your thoughts loosening. The story ending not with fear, but with stillness. Before sleep takes you fully, let us linger in a few quiet rooms of memory, the way you might wander through a museum at closing time, when the footsteps are soft and the air smells of stone and old paper. In a museum, you do not rush. You let the past sit at its own pace. Picture a case of bones, a label that names places in Africa, Morocco, Ethiopia, South Africa. Dates that reach back far beyond any kingdom. The simple message is that our origin is wide, not narrow. Many groups, many variations, many small experiments. Diversity from the start. Now a case of tools. Stone points and scrapers. A person once sat near a fire and chose a rock, turned it in the hand, struck it, listened, tried again. Planning. Patience. The same kind of patience you are practicing right now as you let your breath slow. Then, pigments. Ochre ground into powder, beads carried across long distances, marks carved into an eggshell. Signs that say, I belong, I remember. Culture as a survival tool, binding people so they can endure drought and loss and uncertainty. Walk into a map room. Continents laid out like sleeping shapes. Eurasia long from west to east. Africa tall from north to south. It is only geometry, and yet it changes everything. A crop that thrives in one latitude can travel far along a similar band, but it struggles to cross into a new climate. Innovations move quickly where the land allows, and they stall where the land asks for reinvention. Now imagine a room of animals. A short list of large mammals humans managed to domesticate, mostly from Eurasia. Horses, cattle, sheep, goats, animals that tolerate us, that breed in captivity, that live in herds with hierarchies that can be gently guided. And beside that list, the animals that resisted. Zebras that bite and bolt, buffalo that do not forgive. It is not a story of effort. It is a story of temperament, an evolutionary lottery. Then the room grows darker. Disease. A display about how living beside animals creates constant outbreaks. Measles, influenza, tuberculosis. Waves that kill and scar. Over time, survivors carry resistance forward. It is a terrible tuition fee paid over generations. Across much of tropical Africa, different diseases grind in a different way. Malaria, sleeping sickness, parasites that do not grant easy immunity, a constant pressure that shapes bodies, even blood itself, and drains energy that might otherwise become surplus. Evolution offers protections with trade-offs, a shield that also wounds. And then a small corner case, the tsetse fly. Tiny, ordinary, yet able to draw invisible borders by killing cattle and horses in vast regions. Without draft animals, plowing and transport depend more on human muscle. Surplus grows more slowly, not because mines are slower, but because the environment refuses certain shortcuts. Now, picture a harbor. Salt air, wood creaking, lanterns on water, a ship at anchor. A ship is a pyramid of knowledge floating. Metalwork, navigation, finance, paper. When such ships begin to cross oceans with cannons and contracts, the story shifts from local adaptation to global collision. The first meetings often look like trade, but the hunger for profit hardens. People are turned into commodities. Time is stolen. Generations are pulled out of their own soil and carried across water. This does not only cause suffering in one moment, it changes the future by emptying communities, by breaking trust, by twisting economies toward capture rather than creation. Later, Borders are drawn far away. Lines on maps become fences in the mind. Economies are shaped for extraction. Railways point toward ports. Schools teach foreign stories first. And after the damage is deep, a lie is offered as explanation. That the outcome proves something about worth. That lie is the final cruelty. But the quieter truth remains. When you account for plants and animals and latitude and disease, when you account for ships and violence and the long drain of forced labor, there are no superior peoples. Only humans. Humans shaped by different landscapes. Humans pushed by different pressures. Humans carrying the same deep capacities for language, invention, care, and also harm. Bring the lens closer now. Your skin is a compromise with sunlight. Your limbs are a conversation with temperature. Your blood carries old battles with microbes. These are footprints, not ranks. And now, in the present, the story can be told without the old mask. Systems created the gaps. Systems can be redesigned. Understanding is lighter than shame. It is a candle that warms rather than burns. So let the museum doors close. Let the harbor fade. Return to this room of candlelight and calm. Feel the weight of your body. Feel how your breath keeps moving without effort. The past can be seen clearly, and then set down. Notice the smallest details. The faint tick of cooling wood in the hearth. The way darkness gathers in corners without threat. The soft texture of air as it moves in and out of your nose. In that gentle rhythm, the whole human story becomes quiet again. One species, many paths, one shared night. If a difficult image returns, let it pass like smoke. You do not need to hold it. You can let it rise, thin out, and vanish into the dark above the fire. Your body is safe in this moment. Your mind can rest. Let the river inside you slow, and let sleep arrive with no struggle at all. Good night.